Dear viewers, Mr. Pravin Sawhney in his latest video talks about relation between India and China have changed over the past year. According to him, ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Chinese President Xi Jinping in October 2024 in Kazan, Russia, there has been a noticeable improvement in ties between the two sides. Mr. Sawhney refers to a recent interview given by the Indian Army Chief to a news channel. In that interview, the Army Chief said, "The situation on the line of actual control (LAC) has improved. In the last 1 year alone, there has been 1100 meetings between Indian and Chinese forces. These meetings were conducted at all levels, from higher command right down to the lower tactical levels, including battalion and even company level officers. The purpose of these meetings, as explained by the Army Chief, is to remove small level issues, communication gaps, and misunderstanding, what he calls glitches, so that peace and stability can be maintained along the LAC." Pravin Sawhney says that yes, based on these developments, there are signs that things are generally improving. After giving this background, Mr. Sawhney raises a major question, a question that many people are asking today. With all these high-level talks and ground-level meetings happening, will India now move toward normalizing relations with China? Because since April 2020, after the PLA entered and occupied certain areas in East Ladakh, India has repeatedly said that normal relations are impossible without resolving the border situation. This is why the question is so important. Mr. Sawhney also points out that this same question has now been raised internationally. Recently, in its annual report to the US Congress, a special American panel asked, "Will India normalize relations with China?" Because the answer has major implications for the United States as well. America sees India as a strategic partner in Asia, especially in the Indo-Pacific. If India decides to adjust or soften its position towards China, it will affect American strategy too. This is why the US is closely watching India's moves. Now the main part, what does Mr. Pravin Sawhney himself think? He discusses why the situation is changing, what the signal means, and what does India's long-term strategy might be. He analyzes whether these meetings, diplomatic gestures, and military level talks actually point toward normalization, or whether deeper issues still remain unresolved. So instead of answering directly, he breaks down the bigger picture, and now let's listen to him in his own words.
And my response, what I have maintained in the last 1 year, is still the same, that India will not normalize relations with China at least as long as the Modi government is in power. So, what we are seeing as improvements are mere tactical adjustments to events. Normalization is something entirely different, its implication is something different, which I'll explain later. So, tactical adjustments only.
Now let's move to the next part of Mr. Pravin Sawhney analysis, where he explained why despite improvements on the border, normalization between India and China is still unlikely. According to Mr. Pravin Sawhney, the core reason is very simple. The leadership of both countries has completely different mindsets, and the reason for this difference is what China calls a once in a century change taking place in global politics. So what exactly is this once in a century change? Mr. Sawhney breaks it down into three major components, and understanding these is essential to understand China's mindset today. Mr. Sawhney says the world has shifted from unipolar and bipolar to a truly multipolar system led by three great powers, which is America, China, and Russia. He strongly rejects the Western claim that Russia is a junior partner of China. According to him, that is nonsense. Each of these three is a great power in its own right because all three own three rare attributes. First, they can influence events anywhere in the world. Second, they can protect their power without depending on anyone. Third, they cannot be intimidated or pressured into changing their foreign policy. He emphasizes that out of the 193 countries in the world, only these three nations truly enjoy complete strategic autonomy. This is the first major shift. The second component of this global change is that due to China's dramatic rise, the center global politics have shifted from the west to the Asia Pacific region, which directly includes India's neighborhood. Mr. Sawhney explained the world's political, financial, and economic activities that once revolved around America and Europe are now slowly moving towards Asia. The Asia Pacific has become the most active zone for what the US call maritime contestation. Because of this shift, all three great powers are now heavily focused on this region. China is naturally here. The United States has a massive presence through its Indo-Pacific Command. Russia, due to the Ukraine war, has reorientated its foreign policy toward the east, back into the Asia Pacific. This means the strategic competition is happening right next to India, and China's mindset is shaped by this new geopolitical reality. The third, and according to Mr. Sawhney, the most important component is something the world has never seen before, a new global governance system supported by China and Russia. The system is based on a completely different vision compared to the US led order. In the old system, the United States created global institutions, set the rules, and the rest of the world was expected to follow. But in the China Russia supported system, the key principle is equality, and the most important difference is the concept of security. The old global order was security was based on absolute security, meaning one nation tries to become completely secure even if other becomes insecure. The new global governance security is based in indivisible security, meaning all countries should feel relatively secure so nation is free to choose its own development path. According to Mr. Sawhney, this new idea of relative indivisible security is central to China's worldview today. Why normalization will not happen? And this is where the core point comes in. Because India and China operate with different mindsets shaped by different global vision, normalization becomes extremely difficult. India still aligns with concepts from the older US led order. China, meanwhile, sees itself at the center of a new global system. This difference in worldviews, in priorities, in strategic thinking is why Mr. Sawhney says India China normalization is unlikely in the near future.
Discussion. And the example is of the Central Asian republics. Now, until 1991, when there was demise of the Soviet Union, the Central Asian republics were part of the Soviet Empire, and since then they are the underbelly of Russia. Russia is sensitive to what goes on in Central Asian republics. Therefore, when the Chinese came here to the Central Asian republic, started doing trade and started doing investments there, a lot of American analysts, the Western analysts started writing, well, this will be the breaking point of the friendship of China and Russia because China will not tolerate this. Nothing of that happened. Because President Putin himself, in one of his talks, clarified that the Central Asian republics, China and Russia, they all are part of SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a brilliant example of indivisible security. And beyond that, he said, being equal countries, all the countries have a right to seek their own development path. Kazakhstan, in particular, he said, is a great nation with a lot of population, so it should have its own development path. Not only are the Chinese there now, recently the Americans also they are investing in Kazakhstan and they are looking at creating what is being called a middle corridor, which starts from Kazakhstan, crosses through the Caspian Sea, and then comes to South Caucasus, goes on to Turkey and to Europe. So, the point that I am making is that in this thinking, in this governance system, it is not about confrontation, it is not about containment, it is about cooperation, it is about looking at how mutually agreeable win win solutions can be created for every country's development and prosperity. It is not about a zero sum game. Unfortunately, the Indians still have the colonial mindset and they talk about zero sum game. And the example of this, I'll give two statements made by the External Affairs Minister and the National Security Advisor.
Now let's move on the next part of Mr. Pravin Sawhney. Here he talks about India's mindset towards China and how it clashes with China's worldview. Mr. Sawhney starts by referring to a statement made by India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. He mentions that he does not know the exact time or place where Mr. Ajit Doval said this, but this is what Mr. Ajit Doval stated. China wants to contain India, but where, according to Mr. Doval, is in South Asia. He argues China views India as rival power in Asia, although Mr. Sawhney immediately adds, well, it isn't, meaning India is not actually seen as a competitor to China in the way Indian officials imagine. Mr. Doval also suggested that for China to gain global power, it must first establish regional power. Mr. Sawhney also points out that this same thought has been expressed by India's External Affairs Minister S. J. Shankar, who said a multipolar Asia is necessary for a multipolar world. According to Mr. Sawhney, all of this reflects a mindset focused on dominance and power within South Asia, rather than cooperation or recognizing how the world order has changed. He says this outdated mindset is one of the biggest barriers to normalization. Toward the end of the section, Mr. Sawhney says he will now highlight the three most important events in India's China's relation over the past year. He begins with the first one, the Kazan meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping held in October 2024. And now, before he explains the remaining events in detail, let's listen into him again.
The meeting happened on 24th October in Kazan in Russia, and President Putin had invited Prime Minister Modi to the meeting. There is no way that the Indian Prime Minister could have turned down the invitation of President Putin and not gone there, because India still needs Russia in so many ways. It is a trusted partner, so he had to go. So how this was worked out is that 3 days before, we all know, on 21st October 2024, the MEA gave a press release that the two pending areas where disengagement was to be happened, the Chinese have agreed on the line of actual control. These two areas were Depsang and Depchong. They were the holdout areas. They have agreed now. So now things are fine on the border and the Prime Minister can go. The reality, of course, is different. The reality is that what people don't know is that it was actually in the month of late May or early June that the Chinese had already agreed to these 2 points. But the Indian side held this to be announced at the right time when the Prime Minister was to go. So this was the reason for that, why he went to Kazan. And of course, the two leaders met and commitments were made that we need to improve relations between the two countries. Next, the Prime Minister went for the SCO meeting in China. That was on 1st of September 2025, and the whole world saw those visuals of Modi, Putin, and Xi together in one frame. And all everywhere the talk was that perhaps now, because of President Trump's policies on tariff, now Modi has finally gone and aligned himself with China and Russia. That is, of course, not the truth. The truth is that it was a tactical adjustment made by the Indian side. Prime Minister had to go there, and there were two reasons for that. The first reason was that next year in 2026, India will be hosting the BRICS summit. And it is very clear that without China's fulsome support, India's BRICS cannot be successful. And Indian officials have already indicated that the Prime Minister wants that the BRICS summit be at the same level as how the G20 happened in 2023. So, for that, China's support is required, and therefore, the Prime Minister had to go for the SCO summit to China. And this other reason, of course, is precisely what the Indian side felt. It happened that all the three were in one frame. So a message was sent to the Americans that look, the Indians have the option and they can now go to the other side completely. Well, of course, that was not to happen. That will not happen. Now, so the other things which have done is because India now needs the Chinese. So therefore, very slowly other things are also happening. For example, direct flights have opened up. People are asking why the flights are not opening between the two capitals, Delhi and Beijing, and my guess is because this is where most of the officials they go to and fro, which means that the situation has normalized between the two countries. So perhaps this will be at a later stage that India will agree to this.
Now let's move into the next part of Mr. Sawhney's explanation, where he talks about why normalization between India and China is just not likely but almost impossible. He begins with a very important point. No Chinese investment is coming into India, and according to Mr. Sawhney, this is not a coincidence. He says everyone knows that investment is the biggest symbol of trade trust. China clearly understands the message coming from New Delhi, especially a remark made earlier by India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. India's efficiency cannot be built on China's efficiency. Because of that mindset, China is not investing, and what we are seeing today are only tactical adjustment, not real progress. Mr. Sawhney then explained what normalization actually means and why India will never allow it. He says, if India-China ties normalize, India cannot continue projecting itself as the sole regional power in South Asia. India would also lose the narrative that the Indian Ocean region is its exclusive backyard. Even if the reality on the ground is different, India wants to appear to its domestic audience as if it is in a strong regional competition with China. Because if there is true cooperation, then the implications are huge. Mr. Sawhney reminds us that in 2018, during the Wuhan summit, Prime Minister Modi accepted President Xi Jinping's proposal called China India Plus. This meant that India and China would work together to help develop the smaller South Asian countries. But today, India cannot accept it anymore because if cooperation happens with China's massive financial resources, its infrastructure strength, and its rapid project delivery, China will naturally look like the leader to the smaller nations of South Asia, and India does not want that to happen. Then Mr. Sawhney talks about something that many people don't know. In October 2019, when Xi Jinping visited Chennai for the second informal summit, he discussed the idea of triangular peace between India, China, and Pakistan. Modi didn't commit to it, but he listened. And according to Mr. Sawhney, this idea still sits heavily in the minds of India's leadership. This is another reason India cannot allow complete normalization because that would reopen the possibility of China becoming a mediator or leader in the region. Mr. Sawhney then highlights a major contradiction. India wants to position itself as the leader of the global south, but he says the truth is very different. The global south has united today primarily because of China, not India, and the world knows it. The global south knows it too. So the normalization with China would weaken India's claim to leadership. He also mentioned the recent meeting between President Trump and President Xi, where the relationship has started to soften, even if only temporarily and on technical grounds. This happened in South Korea. Mr. Sawhney says that every time the US and China improve the relationship, India becomes worried because India sees the world through a zero summit mindset. If America moves closer to China, India fears that China might increase pressure on the line of actual control. And he finally reminds us of something Mr. S.J. Shankar openly admitted during a TV interview. India cannot fight a war with a nation that has 5 times more economic capability. This means India understands the cost of confrontation, yet it also fears cooperation, and that contradiction is why normalization remains impossible. Let's listen into him again.
Point that I am making is we will only see tactical adjustments. India's commitment to America and the global north is total. India has already committed some to Mission 500 of America, even without America asking it. And this was done in the 13th February this year statement that was signed when Prime Minister Modi went and met President Trump in the White House. So Mission 500 means that India is committed in the next 5 years till 2030 to take the bilateral trade to $500 billion, which means a whole lot of things. So that is where, as far as the Modi government is concerned, its foreign policy is there, but it is making tactical tilts and adjustments both towards China as well as Russia. Russia relations are improving, they will improve more, but mind you, the tilt will always be towards America, and which is not a good thing for a country of the size of 1.4 billion people. It is the smaller countries which can take advantage of the other two powers or three powers. But for a big country, it is necessary that you take a position if you want to be counted as a major power. And India is a global south nation, and it has the opportunities here, as I said, of this once in a century change, and that is what it needs. It needs basically better relations, normal relations with China, and it needs peace with Pakistan. In my next video, I will talk about India's relations with Russia, which is very important because President Putin is coming beginning of December. Until then, thank you so much.
Thank you for staying till the end. I'm Zainab Safraz Ahmad, a student of geopolitics, and I truly appreciate you taking the time to understand these complex issues with me. If this video helped you, do support the channel by liking and subscribing. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.